What's up, witches? Today, I'm here to talk to you about everyone's favorite trickster, Loki. Hopefully, it will be a little bit more coherent than my Odin video. But this is going to be an interesting video because, for one thing, I think when you're going into Norse paganism, not your first thought isn't necessarily to worship Loki, or at least, like, mine definitely wasn't. I didn't have any intention of really incorporating Loki into my practice, but he had other ideas. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I chose to incorporate Loki into my practices as a Norse pagan, and what those practices look like. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do is to read to you this passage, which I believe is from Gylfaginning. I'll have to go double check, but it's from one of the sagas or Eddas. So this is what I had written down as a historical account we have of Loki. But in regards to Loki, who is usually called Loki Laufeyson after his mother, they write that there was a giant, Farboti, whose wife was Laufey. One child they had, Loki. Not great of growth was he, but betimes shameless of tongue and nimble in gait. Over all men had he that craft called cunning. Guileful was he from his youth up, therefore was he called Loki the Sly. He betook himself to Asgard, and made himself Odin's man. Ever had Odin a good word for him whatsoever he did, yet withal he oft laid heavy labours upon him, which he turned out of hand better than any man looked for. Moreover, he knew well nigh all things that befell, and told all he knew to Odin. So let's go into a little bit of Loki's ancestry. Loki is half Jotun on his father Farboti's side, and Farboti, from the little I was able to find just on like Wikipedia and Google searches, it's really hard to trace an exact etymology for a lot of these names, but the closest that we can approximate for the name of Loki's father is something like fierce striker or like swift striker, and he's a Jotun, which are kind of the chaotic beings of the elements, the untamable forces of nature. They're the ones that aren't really so much concerned with mankind's well-being, unlike the Aesir and the Vanir. But his mother is Laufey, which means something like leafy. And so to me, she sounds very similar to a lot of these other like Norse, Scandinavian, and Germanic tree goddesses that we see in a lot of the mythologies, like Berkta, Berkano, birch, and then Perthro, some think was pear, and so all these different goddesses of the forest and different trees. And so I kind of associate Laufey with those types of goddesses because she is listed in the Eddas among the list of the Einherjar, or basically the list of the Aesir, which were, the top dogs of the pantheon. To me, the curious thing about Loki, and especially where his relationship with Odin is concerned, is that they both have the same bloodlines, the same ancestry, in terms of both are half Jotun. If you look back far enough, in the Eddas, it does say that Odin himself is descended from Jotun. So the key difference, though, is that Loki's Aesir heritage is from his mother's side, and Odin's Aesir heritage is from his father's side. or at least that's how he proclaims it to be after Odin takes over as kind of the top of the pantheon. But, you know, like I said, history is written by the victors, so that could just be something that they're saying about Odin, or that Odin is saying about himself to kind of prop up his lineage and his birthright. So, just saying. But the curious thing about this to me is, I think that could be, in my opinion, one of the sources for a lot of Loki's like bitterness and resentment toward the Aesir, because he has the same ancestry as Odin. They're both half Jotun, but if we're now living in a more patrilineal society where birthright and ancestry are all descended from the male bloodlines and preference is given to the male heirs, that would put Odin's heritage slightly above Loki's, because his bloodline comes from his father's side, whereas Loki is usually called Loki Laufeyson because his Aesir heritage comes from his mother's side, which wouldn't have mattered as much if you're not a matrilineal society. So I could kind of see why Loki might be a little bit bitter and resentful about that, because like, in his mind, his blood is just as good as Odin's. Why can't he get acclaim and attention on equal footing? It's just something to think about. The other interesting thing about Laufey is, if you've read the Finnish epics, the Kalevala, Laufey sounds very similar to a character in those myths called Laufey or Lohi. It's spelled very similar, pronounced very similar. But she is like a sorceress, high priestess / queen, or what would usually be referred to as a witch in these epics, who is the queen of the North, Pohjola, which I'm not saying it's Hyperborea, you guys, but it's Hyperborea. So yeah, she's basically the queen of Hyperborea. She's a witch, and you'll see her going up against the heroes in these sagas a lot, setting them like labors, not unlike the labors of Hercules, like tasks that they have to complete if they want whatever it is that they're seeking from her, which in the Finnish epics is usually they want to marry Laufey's daughters, these different gods, which are very similar to the Aesir gods, in my opinion. I definitely recommend that after you read the Eddas, if you're looking to dive a little bit further into those stories, definitely check out the Finnish Kalevala. I wanted to touch a little bit on, to me, what Loki is and what he is not. Because if you're just taking into account Snorri Sturluson's Eddas, these were written many years after the Viking Age, and which itself took place many, many years after the spread of like Christianity started to infiltrate these societies and push out this worship of these old gods. So it's kind of like a thousands-year-old game of telephone when you're reading the Eddas. Snorri Sturluson was a Christian monk. He was compiling these stories from these thousands of year old oral traditions, and he was trying to make sense of it from his perspective, and just from a linear perspective. He had all these different fragmentary pieces of myths, stories, heroes, gods, goddesses, some of which were just their names were just kennings for the same gods and goddesses, so it's really hard to tell from all these things he was compiling who was being talked about and when a lot of these stories were supposedly taking place. So he kind of just rearranged things, filled in the blanks as best he could, and threw out whatever he couldn't fit and whatever didn't make sense in that structure. So, in my opinion, the Loki that we see portrayed in a lot of these stories that do survive and was written down by Snorri in the Eddas ended up being conflated a lot with this devil, satanic evil figure, and that paradigm of black and white, good versus evil thinking, which when you're getting into Norse paganism, you really need to just throw that whole paradigm aside. We need to get out of the black and white dualistic way of thinking, because not just Loki, but I think Odin as well are very much the gods of the gray areas in between. But Loki's not just evil, Odin's not just good. They both occupy those gray areas, and especially Loki. So Loki is not Satan. Loki is not evil. What Loki is to me is a kind of Luciferian figure, or a Promethean figure, in that he is a light bringer. Whereas Odin is thought without action. He's observing from afar. He wants to know what's going to happen, but he doesn't act on it, or very rarely is he able to act on it, because he's trying to be this god of law and order in some ways, as far as, keeping his word and forming diplomatic pacts with Jotun and different beings that he encounters. So in a lot of ways, that ends up tying Odin's hands. And so you see a lot in, like, the Nibelungen this version of Odin where he's making these oaths and these deals, and then his hands kind of end up being tied by those down the line, and he's trying to find different ways, usually with Loki's help, to find a way to, like, a loophole to get out of these deals that he's made for himself, basically, because Odin can be very ruthless in doing what he thinks needs to get done for the benefit of himself and the Aesir. And so I kind of joked the other day that in a lot of ways, Loki is kind of Odin's left-hand man, or, like, not so much hitman, but like his secret agent in a way, because Loki is the one that's able to operate outside the bounds of morality, outside the bounds of, like, polite society, and that earns him a lot of derision and scorn from the other gods, because he doesn't follow the rules. He does whatever he wants. Loki is that id, that acting without thinking about the consequences, whereas that's all Odin does, is think about the consequences, because he is able to see all the different threads and how they interweave and connect. Loki doesn't take any of that into consideration. Loki just does what Loki wants. Honey Badger just takes what it wants. Loki, to me, is very akin to the trickster figures that we see in a lot of other mythologies, especially those shamanistic religions like the coyote from Native American myth, and then the one that he always really reminds me of is Anansi the spider, and that kind of gets me into how Loki first came into my life as a deity. When I decided I was going to start offering to Odin and set up a space for Odin in my home, they were kind of a package deal. Loki ended up coming along for the ride and wanting his share of attention. And I've noticed a lot of people saying that they are experiencing very similar things when they come into Norse paganism, is that Loki just starts showing up. And if you are willing to welcome him into your space and into your practice and give him that attention, he will stick around and he will expect you to keep it up. What I always tell people is, if you're not ready or you just don't want to work with Loki, because like I said, I had no intention of working with Loki, and I kind of did have that dualistic way of thinking of it at first, of like, if I were to offer to Loki, would that even be okay to do? Or is that crazy? Or would that be kind of viewed as devil worship? Which I quickly, the more you read into Loki and the role he plays within the stories, he's not an evil figure. He often has to do very difficult or onerous tasks laid upon him by Odin, whether it be to get Loki out of his trouble of his own making, or helping Odin to get out of ties of his own making. Yeah, trying to find those loopholes, like when Odin makes the deal with the wall builder to build the wall around the enclosure of Asgard, and they have to offer him this, the sun, the moon, Freya, and all these different things to get him to do it. And then they're like, oh shit, you guys, I think this guy is actually going to pull this off. What are we going to do? Like, Loki, you have to find you're good at this kind of shit. You have to find a way to get us out of this deal. Like, you have to help us. And he does. And that's the story of how we ended up with Sleipnir, which we're not allowed to talk about. Getting parched. How did Loki come into my life? When I started worshiping Odin, Loki came along for the ride. And the reason why I kind of started associating him with the Anansi spider trickster is because I noticed that all of a sudden, this was like early September, so it was still pretty summer here in Cornlandia, but all of a sudden I was just getting spiders thrown at me everywhere. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that every time I set foot outside on my back porch, which I have this covered porch out back, every time I set foot out there, a spider would come down from a little thread and almost land on my head. And this happened almost every time I went outside for at least 2 weeks straight. We also had what I was calling the spider bro. We have a security camera out on our front porch, and the spider, he just lived there, and every night he would come out and make a new web in front of the camera. And so sadly, not long after becoming Norse pagan, that spider did die, and I was outside with a little duster cleaning up the cobwebs. And while I was out there, I'm a very shy, introverted person. I know the two neighbors on either side of me, but I don't really talk to them very regularly, let alone anyone else in my neighborhood. But while I was out there cleaning away this cobweb, this old man who I had never seen on my street before, just appeared out of nowhere and struck up a conversation with me about spiders and how cool spiders are. And this old man that I had never met before in my life, just kind of all out of the blue was like, you must be a nature lover. I can tell. At first I was like, oh God, normally I'm someone's talking to me. I'm stuck at small talk. What do I do? How do I get out of this as soon as possible? But if there's one thing I have learned from reading Greek and Norse mythology, it's if a wandering old elderly figure appears on your doorstep and just wants hospitality from you or just to strike up a conversation, just be polite and talk to them, because you may be entertaining Odin in disguise. You never know. And we ended up having just a very nice brief conversation about how cool spiders are, and right after that happened, I went around the side of the house to where my bedroom window is, because I knew that there were just a lot of cobwebs built up in there. When I went to clean those out, I found 5 more spiders just all camped out in that corner of the house, right under my bedroom window, which as a person who is extremely arachnophobic and does not like spiders at all, even itty bitty tiny ones, I wasn't really cool with having that many sleeping right next to where I was sleeping. But I don't know, I was already starting to just make these associations between Loki and spiders in my mind, because I felt that was his way of trying to get my attention. Literally, yeah, the little, the kid brother dangling the toy spider in front of his sister to scare her. That was what he was doing. It was oh, you're giving offerings over here? You're giving attention out to the gods? Ooh, do me next. So I was all right, I'll just go with this. For a while, a lot of people will talk about the Loki shenanigans and pranks and hijinks, because he's a trickster, and I joke that he very much is about that energy. I saw another video the other night that put it very well when it said that if that's the only opening that you give Loki into your life is as a prankster and a trickster, then he will take that opening, and that's all you will get from him. And that's definitely how I viewed him as at first. I'm a clumsy person, so don't get me wrong, I'm not blame every time I stub my toe, I'm not cursing Loki, okay? Those little twists of fate where the coin flips you toss the die, and it could either land on you get in a terrible accident or you barely get away unscathed. Like, he's that. He's like freak crazy accidents that have a 1 in 1,000 chance of happening, but not like fatal, not bad. I was like eating chips a couple days ago, and it had been like weeks since I had given anything at the altar for them, and I kind of like knew in the back of my mind that I should probably give Loki something soon, or he was gonna like make it known that he wanted attention. And so I'm like eating some tortilla chips. I'm wearing my glasses, and I go to bite this chip, and like a shard of tortilla chip somehow breaks off mid-bite and manages to fly up under my glasses and like stab me in the eyeball. Like, that's Loki shit. And so there was like this 2 or 3 week period where just spiders were popping up everywhere. Right after I found the ones outside and decided to leave them be, the next day I was like down in the basement, and this freaking huge spider came crawling up like right above my computer desk, and like this thing was massive. We have brown recluses here, so all right, that's now you've gone too far. I can't abide this. So I made my husband kill it with fire, and literally that day my workbook on the runes, like the one book that I'd had for years on runes, disappeared from the stack that I had sitting right on the table of books that I was reading. It just vanished from right there in plain sight, and it was gone for like at least a couple days to almost a week before it just turned back up out of nowhere. So yeah, that was Loki's revenge for me killing the spider. I'm trying to be more chill with them now, and I think Loki also reminds me of spiders because like he is kind of like sly and kind of sneaky like a spider. I always say that like the thing I don't like about spiders isn't so much that like they themselves creep me out as that like they are sly, they're hidden. Like, you never know where they're lurking. If I see a spider, like the one, like the spider bro that was living out on our porch, I was cool with him because he just stayed in one spot out in the open, and I always knew where he was. As long as you stay right there and you don't leave that spot and I know where you are, we can be cool. It's the little creepy lurky ones that just pop up out of nowhere like, boo, I'm a spider, that I don't like. And then I started to notice that like almost anytime I would be over here standing at the Freya altar to do something with Freya, he would either have some kind of chaos thing happen in the house, like the cats would just start spazzing out and go crazy. Usually a little spider would show up. I have that little white pillar candle that I had carved runes on, and that's like my Freya candle. And there was one time I went to go light it, and I saw this little itty bitty, teeny weeny baby spider like crawl his way up to the top of the candle. And like even after I had lit the candle, and because you know, like you go to hold your hand above a candle flame, that shit is hot. Like this little baby spider, like I kid you not, just like sidled right on up on the edge of the candle and like just turned around, was just warming his butt on the flame. Not too long after that, around Yule, I had brought in this like actual log to be my Yule log from outside, and I just had it chilling back here behind me. And so I had left this log there just chilling for a couple days, you know, plenty of time for whatever bugs were living there to have moved off elsewhere before I came back to decorate it. And when I did, yeah, this little tiny spider just came crawling out and was just chilling there. And I tried to like brush him off and get rid of him, but he like went and hid somewhere in the bark of the log. And so it's just like, sup, Loki. A couple weeks after that, I usually like will sit on the ground over here to do tarot readings, specifically with or for Freya sometimes, like just in front of the Freya altar. And there was one time I was sitting over here to do that, and keep in mind, this is like dead of winter, like spiders should all be dead right now, let alone like in my house. All of a sudden, just in the middle of the rug, like it appeared out of nowhere, in the middle of the carpet right next to me where I was laying out my cards, was this like little spider just showed up. I tried to be nice that time, and I picked it up on a piece of paper and just brought him outside, but like every time, like Loki will just kind of send his little sign to be like, bloop, I'm here. And then the other interesting thing that pretty much solidified him for me in my practice was you will read that while the story of the origin of this is lost to us, unfortunately, the one thing that we do know from the Eddas is that Odin and Loki are blood brothers, and that Odin made some type of oath back in the day that he would never drink without Loki. Like, anytime Odin gets a drink, Loki also gets to drink with him. And I thought that was very interesting, especially if you are coming at it from that dualistic black versus white, Loki's evil platform of thinking. Like, why would Odin bond himself to Loki in such a way if he's so bad? So along with their shared bloodlines, I think part of the reason for this, and disclaimer, this is just all my own theories from my own head and from my various readings and researches, so do not come for me, because I have nothing to back any of this up. This is just all my crazy conspiracy theory time, so get your tinfoil hats out. I think that along with having that shared ancestry, the reason that Odin vowed that Loki will always have a seat at his table is because of the things that Loki has to do on Odin's behalf, because he has to act as his man behind the scenes, manipulating things in the shadows and acting without that morality a lot of times to get things done for the gods. And so, as I said, I think because he acts outside the bounds of morality, that earned him a lot of scorn from the other deities, especially among the Aesir. I think that's why it's like it said, no matter what he did, no matter how bad it was, even after Loki killed Balder, Odin still said, no, guys, I made a promise. We have to you have to let him sit and drink with us, even after that. And so for that reason, what I ended up doing is I have 2 drinking horns on my altar, which you've seen if you've seen my altar tour videos. I have one for Odin and one for Loki. And to me, I don't know why, I just have this automatic association of Odin is on the right and Loki is on the left. So that's kind of how I've divided my altar down the middle. So the left horn is for Loki, the right horn is for Odin. Personally, I always pour out offerings of drink to Odin first, and I think that's just because he's the one that I chose to work with, so I feel like it's only respectful of me to give him his libations first. I did find out that the interesting thing about Odin is that it's said that he either can't or doesn't need to eat food. He only lives off of meat and wine and ale. So I think for me it's okay, if I'm offering Loki food, which I do a lot. He wanted some of my breakfast yesterday. If I'm giving Loki food, I will also give some to Odin, because even if he doesn't eat it, I figure he can always give it to his wolves or his ravens. But always give Odin drink. If you're giving Loki drinks, always give some to Odin, because if he can't or doesn't want to eat, you should always give him something to drink. There was one time I wasn't thinking, and I was going to give some offerings to Loki on the altar of just food, and I have 2 candles there, and so one I considered the Odin candle and one the Loki candle. And when I lit them, the flame on the Odin candle was just going crazy. It was almost 2 inches high, and just the flame was just growing and growing and just streaming up toward the ceiling and just flipping the frick out. I realized it was because I had put food down, but I hadn't given them anything to drink. And so I think Odin was kind of reprimanding me a little bit about that one. I had heard the other day where people will give to Loki first, because if Odin can only drink with Loki present, giving Loki the drink first helps Odin receive it better, but to each their own. Like I said, this is just all my own personal feeling, my own intuitive practices, so do whatever works for you. If you want nothing to do with Loki, if you feel like someone's fucking with you and it might be him, but you don't want to incorporate him into your practice, just let him know. I said that, the only person it seems like Loki's actually scared of in the stories is Thor, because whenever Thor finally shows up is when Loki finally makes himself scarce. So I think, if you're not ready or you don't want Loki all up in your business, just tell him to get lost, and and, call on Thor if you need some backup. At first, I was kind of like, what the hell does Loki even want with someone like me? Because for most of my life, up until recently, I have always dealt with general anxiety and just been a chronic worrier. I was just living under this fog of anxiety for so long. And so I've always been all about stability. And so I was like, what does Loki want with me? But the more I learned about him and researched him and what he kind of represents beyond just that trickster figure, the more I found that resonated with me and my personality and my upbringing. Because I was a bit of an army brat growing up. My dad was in the National Guard, and so while I've lived in the Midwest most of my life, we moved around a lot in my childhood. So my life was one of kind of constant change and upheaval, and I always had to learn to adapt and get used to new surroundings and kind of make myself a social chameleon in a lot of ways, because I was always the new kid. And so I think that's a lot of why I've been going through a lot of shadow work now that I'm in my 30s, to try to undo all of that and figure out, like, who am I underneath? Like, who am I? Who do I want to be? Because I've always just been kind of trying to tailor myself and my behavior to fit in. And Loki is very much about that entropy, whereas like Odin is about bringing order from the chaos, like through the runes and through Galder. Loki is that pure like entropy chaos energy. And to me, the other image that I often associate with him, which is one of my just one of the most poignant images to me for some reason, for anyone who's familiar with Hinduism, is of Shiva the Destroyer. There's this image of Shiva the Destroyer where he's just dancing in this ring of flames, and it symbolizes like he's dancing through the destruction of the world, basically. That to me is just pure Loki chaos energy, because he's the god of change. Anytime the gods are getting too complacent or full of themselves, like, Loki is right there to bring them down off their high horses, especially in Baldur's case. He's the innovator. Like, he's getting himself into trouble, like a lot of the stories about Coyote, but then just as often he's innovating ways of things that have never been seen before to get himself out of it. And so you always hear that he's the reason why the gods have all of these great weapons and gifts, like Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, Frey's boar Gullinbursti. If you ask me, Gullinbursti, the golden bristled boar, is also a metaphor for some type of ancient technology, but that's another video. He's the reason why the gods get all of these great new wonderful things that they have, which is why I liken him to that like Promethean Lightbringer figure in a way, and also associate him with the rune Kinaz, which is kind of a rune associated with fire and the torch and light bringing. The more I learned about those qualities that he represents, the more I kind of saw those qualities within myself and realized how he encourages us to embrace the fact that, as I have kind of made my motto, especially, the more that you get into adulthood and deal with the ups and downs and trials and tribulations that come with that, the only constant is change. If there is one thing I have learned in my life, in my almost 35 years of life, the only constant is change. Get used to it. As much as I don't want to admit it, and I want things to stay the same because I like things the way they are and I fear change, the only constant is change. That is what I have written here in my notes under Loki's words of wisdom, which were, the things that Loki has taught me and constantly teaches us to accept and recognize is his top two are: the only constant is change, and to thine own self be true. And to me, that is him representing that chaotic neutral energy of he kind of makes his own rules and decides for himself what is moral, amoral. He doesn't care about the societal definitions thereof. I think if you can just learn to embrace those things and accept that, yeah, like, you have to be true to yourself. Also in the sense of that, like, Loki is that one friend who's gonna always tell it like it is. Like, if you go to Lokasena when he's, like, calling all the gods out on their shit and insulting them, but, like, they can't really say anything to him about it because it's kind of, like, it's true. So it's like, yeah, you can't, like, the one person that you can't lie to at the end of the day is yourself. You can try and you can get really good at it and get away with it for a long time, but not forever. So yeah, be true to yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Accept that sometimes we need that radical change and we need something to come around and burn it all down and upset the apple cart so that we can build something better out of the pieces. So that to me is what Loki represents, and why when he started making those energies known to me and I started tracing those things to him, I decided to go with the flow and accept him. And while I would say that I don't actively make Loki a part of my practice in the day-to-day, at least not as much as I plan to with the Vanir and with Odin, I do set aside that space for him on the Odin altar. It's primarily an Odin altar and primarily where I will be going to do spell work just because it's a larger, more accessible space. While I don't know if I will ever be like a Loki follower per se, or have like anything specifically dedicated to him in my home, or like a space for him outside of that. I do plan, like, and I do incorporate him into my practices with Odin by having the two horns on the altar and by giving him drink anytime I give Odin one, and vice versa. So that's really the only thing I do right now as far as Loki is concerned, is just, yeah, keeping up Odin's end of the bargain with him. And the other way I kind of put it is that, to me, making offerings to Loki is, he's kind of like a mob boss, or like when the Vikings would come to pillage your village, the kings or the townspeople would gather up their valuables and kind of offer it to them, like, okay, here's all our stuff, we'll give you what you want if you just leave us alone and don't mess with us anymore. And that's, I'm not gonna lie, like, that's kind of how I see offering to Loki in a lot of ways, is like, I'm gonna give you what you want so that hopefully you will leave me the fuck alone for a while and stop messing with me. He can, like, while he's not just that trickster figure or like an attention whore, he still very much like is that energy. Even negative attention is still attention. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to go into how personally I have come to see him as a lot more than that. And how, yeah, I think him and Odin are two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. Odin, like, not only are they blood brothers, but Odin is just as sly and manipulative and just as tricky as Loki is when he needs to be or when he wants to be. You know, he goes by many names and, yeah, is often wandering around in disguise and getting into battles of wits with people and kind of trying to manipulate things behind the scenes where he can. But yeah, he's not really able to act overtly. So yeah, I think I am going to do a third video in this kind of series of Odin and Loki, where I talk about some of those more obscure, crazy ideas I have as far as like comparative mythology goes. So that's kind of my experiences that I've had with Loki so far. The other thing that I noticed that has happened to me a lot, like even years before becoming Norse pagan, is that thing where, like, when objects go missing, Like, you'll put your keys down right there, and then you go back and they're gone. Or then you go back 2 hours later, and there it is. Or yeah, like when my rune book went missing after I killed that spider. I definitely, at one point, I was told a couple years ago by a psychic that was like your spirit guide's way of trying to get your attention, because like they were trying to get messages or get your attention and you weren't listening. And that was like one way of trying to get your attention. And so while I never really got much into like getting in touch with or working with spirit guides, now that I'm kind of taking that approach, that like mentor, mentee, guardian angel approach toward like Freya and Odin, he definitely, oh my god, I totally just spaced out. I don't even remember. Anyway, yeah, I was talking about objects going missing, and whereas I think I was saying like how I never got into working with like spirit guides, I kind of view these deities as spirit guides in a way. Yeah, now I could definitely see Loki being the one behind those shenanigans. Just wanted to put out there that there is so much more to him than that. Lokis are like ogres, which are like onions. They have layers. Yeah, Rambly Shrek analogy. I don't know. I think I've gone through like all my notes now at this point, so I'm just rambling aimlessly. So I think I'm gonna leave this video here. I think I might go back and make a third video, kind of going more in depth into Odin and Loki. One way that I had of putting it is that, to quote Ghostbusters, Odin is the gatekeeper and Loki is the keymaster. I'll just leave you with that little nugget to ruminate on, and until next time.